Connecticut GOP was strong and thriving, we wouldn't have 3 or more candidates declared to challenge the incumbent chairman. That being said, what do you believe is broken with the Connecticut GOP? What are the 5 biggest mistakes being made, and why are you running for chairman?
That's not one question.
We'll start with, we'll start in the same order, and then we'll shake it up a little bit. We'll start with Joe.
Yeah, that is, that's almost like asking me for the opening statement. Yes, I think that if I were going to talk, let me take one part of that. Let's talk about what are 5 big problems. You know, if I asked every one of you to list what the 5 biggest problems are, we would have, I think, not identical but similar lists. There are certain things that just have to be done that are not getting done effectively. I talked, let me take one that has been a favorite of mine, which is data. The Republican Party, the State Central Committee, has to be able to provide good, usable data for candidates. And at no point that I've been involved, either in my first iteration or in my current manifestation, have I ever gotten the support in data that we need. And at one point, the Republican Party was ahead on this. Now we're well behind the Democrats. They have found ways to target voters that are far more effective than what we're doing. In micro-targeting, where you can identify people's proclivities, not simply by their registration, but by the newspapers they subscribe to, and the neighborhoods they live in, and the cars they drive, and everything else. Only one body can do that for the Republicans in Connecticut, and that's the State Central Committee. We've had 4 high-priced campaigns over the last 4 years, you're all quite aware of, that have accumulated an enormous amount of data. Where is it? Why isn't it centralized back in the party? That's the only repository it can have. How do we solve that problem? We don't solve it by going out and hiring somebody who comes in and dumps something on our lap and walks away from it. We hire it by working it through as a committee. We've got the people on State Central that have both the interest and the expertise in figuring out what it is that we need, in pursuing who it is that should do it, in being asked to report back to the State Central Committee, in setting up a process so that we can work together as a group. My goal is not to be the czar of the Republican Party, but to be the chairman, to bring together a group of people that can tackle problems that they are suited to tackle, and that can come up with solutions that we all can go on board with. And that is an answer to 1/5 of 1/3 of your question.
Gerald leaned over to me and said, we get to cheat because he had to go first. That was a tough question.
Go 5, you can think about it.
Yeah, exactly. I think the biggest thing the biggest problem in our party right now is there's a leadership gap. There's a huge void in leadership. As Jared was talking about, the state party chairman has to provide leadership, and in doing so, has to define roles and responsibilities. Right now, I think there's no good definitions and lines of responsibility of who's responsible for what. But I think when I think about the biggest problems in our state and party, I think about the message and someone leading and getting people to buy in and getting us all agree on what we stand for. I think the problem that when I talk to people who aren't that political, but they do vote, and they can go either way, they talk about the Republican Party and they say, you know, I just don't know what you guys stand for. And I think as a leader, trying to bring together a large organization, the first thing you have to do is get buy-in on what we do agree on and move forward on that. Because there's plenty of stuff that we don't agree on, and we all know that. And I think the art of the deal in trying to manage this party and make it a successful organization is from the top, leading by example and showing how you have to establish what the brand is, protect the brand, which is what Reagan was all about. Do what you want, but don't damage the brand. Let's not get in a circle and shoot each other. But let's first determine what we're for. Let's make sure that's the brand, that's the message we're sending to people, that's something that's going to attract people to the party. And the things we don't agree on, let's demonstrate by example how we communicate with each other and agree to disagree, again, without hurting the party. Because no one, I don't think, wants to be involved in an organization that stands in a circle and shoots each other.
I completely agree. I think data is one. I think branding absolutely is another one. One of the other things that truly is a big problem for me is education. I know you guys are starting to work with, in Grassroots Eats, with training town chairmen, and the reason that's happening is because there's no structure for training. Data is great, but if we're not educating town committees and candidates how to use the data, then it's not going to work anyway. So I think education and training is a big problem right now. I know that they sporadically have training sessions, but it's not enough. There needs to be a consistent understanding of how to use data. I know when I helped up here, we talked about how to continually to build data, identify voters, and be clever about it. The other thing is, for me, is the notion of team. We allow the Democrats to divide us, right? Rhinos, social conservative, fiscal conservatives, libertarians. And quite frankly, because we divide ourselves and snip at each other, we're not moving the ball forward. One of the lines I often say is, we are the last best hope for freedom and free thought in this state. And we need to remind ourselves of that when we're snipping at each other, that without us, this state is going to continue to go in a very bad direction. And so I don't like using that term rhino to describe anybody, but we have to step back. And that, again, boils down to leadership. Is a chairman allowing a social conservative to be heard and not to run away from it, allowing a libertarian, allowing the Tea Party people to have a seat at the table? Like, that has to happen. And ultimately, there's some infrastructure issues that have to do with State Central and how the membership is used and communicate with town chairmen. But ultimately, those are the 5 things that I think all of us would agree need fundamental change. So.
John, you want to ask a
Yes.
question? And we'll start with John, and then we'll go with JR, and then we'll go to Joe.
Tom Poplawski from Thompson, a Republican town chairman there. I feel the biggest problem in our state Republican place is that our problem is our state convention. You say leadership. Well, I think you need to change some of the rules in that, because it divides us. When you have a runoff where you can have 3 or 4 people in a primary, that divides us. There should be only 2 people that can run in a primary. Because a 3-way race, it's not going to work. You're not going to get the best electable candidate to win. That's my opinion. How are you going to change that?
John?
Yeah, so you know, a great example is what we saw last time with the gubernatorial race, right?
The year before,
And the
4
year
years
before,
before.
right? Look, the party chairman is not, as I think JR said, is not the party czar, and you can't prevent someone from running. However, you can apply influence, and I think number one, when it comes to multiple candidates in races, I think the party chairman can exert a lot of influence on keeping a candidate out who really has no shot, and has the real ability to just hurt the party and hurt the brand. And I think, you know, when I think about the last gubernatorial race, I think about a lot of things in terms of providing leadership and using the power of the chairmanship to try to keep it to the viable candidates who should be up on the stage talking. With that said, you know, I think one of the things that we started to do under Chris Healy is we created a board of advisors, which was some of the major donors in the state. And what I encouraged Jerry to do was to use some of these people to try to clear the field and exert some influence over what they're running for, should they run, because I don't think one person can do it. I don't think you get a person with a strong personality who wants to run for an office. They sit before you, and the chairman is going to be able to say you're not running. However, if you use the power of your leadership, of your team, your management team, your investors, including your major donors, then you can exert some influence. But you've got to, I think you're exactly right. I think in the last go-around, what we saw was someone who really has not had much experience running large organizations, and when it came to trying to keep order in the House, there was no order. And again, we were damaging the brand. And I think when you think about Reagan, it was all about primary if you want, but don't damage the brand of the Republican Party.
Well, I think in terms of the context of the question, the convention process, although difficult, it vetted everyone out. The third-party candidate that ran as a third-party candidate. He didn't get enough votes to primary, and then he went to petition.
I need to clarify that question. What I meant was, you need a certain percentage of votes of delegates to qualify to run in a primary. So
Correct,
at that
15%.
convention, theoretically, I don't know the exact numbers, but you could have at least probably 4 people running for that same office, couldn't you?
Yes.
Mathematically, maybe. At least 3, we know. Maybe 4, maybe more. You know, it divides out. 6, actually, thank you. And that's the problem right there. The convention should narrow it down to 2. End of story.
Well, the
Change
state,
the rules.
currently the state central committee has organized a group that is analyzing our process. They're addressing whether we do convention, whether we go direct to primary, whether we bring in unaffiliateds to vote in our primary. I do agree to a certain extent, although for me, I think primaries also offer an opportunity for campaigns to demonstrate their ability to do the ground game. And to build a good ground game before it's time for the main show. And essentially, that can be vital when it comes to a very close election. Unfortunately, this year, I don't think the challengers had enough money or support to truly challenge Tom Foley, and he never got that test, per se. But sometimes primary can be beneficial in that regard, where it vets candidates. But I understand 6 and 4 or 5, it can be way too much, and you don't want to damage your brand. But I think from an organizational standpoint, it can be beneficial. It's like practice.
Tom, if you'll forgive me, I don't agree.
It's okay. It's your opinion.
Here's what I'd say about it. First of all, I'd say this about the chairman's relationship to this. I get asked about, should we skip the convention process and just go directly to the primary by petition? Should we allow affiliates to vote in the primary? All these different questions. I think these are decisions we have to make as a party. I don't think these are decisions that the chairman should make and try to impose on anybody. If I really thought something awful was going on, I'd do my best to stop it. But a decision like that is kind of a matter of opinion. And I'm not sure there's ever a perfect process. Every process has its advantages and disadvantages. What I'd say about the multi-candidate primaries is I was thinking about it. See, I had this time to think about it since he asked the question. We had Foley one-on-one in a primary, and we lost. We had him 4 years earlier in a 3-way race, and we lost. We had Roland one-on-one with Pauline Keyser, then he won the election. I'm not sure there's any real historical, in fact, Derek remembers that convention too. But I'm not sure there's any real historical pattern that would say the ideal situation for us to win is to have a 2-way primary, a 3-way primary, or a 6-way primary. You have primaries that end up with hard feelings, frequently for reasons that have to do with the personalities of the candidates or the issues that divide them. And we have primaries that we come out of in good shape. I think the point is the chairman should focus not on trying to determine how the convention or the primary comes on, but building a Republican Party that is a strong machine to take whoever comes out of that primary on to victory. And as much as possible, being as much an honest broker as he possibly can, right up until that moment, so he can turn over to the candidate and say, I got an operation that can elect you, and it's ready to go.
And just to add, I think all 3 of us agree, to maintain some kind of order during the process, because if you can't do away with the primary system, and you're gonna have multiple candidates, there should be order, and there shouldn't be disorder, because that just hurts the Republican Party in general.
Okay, next question, and we'll start with JR. What role would the legislator have if you were elected chairman?
I think that this is an interesting question because in Connecticut we have a tough situation because we're in a minority. And I'll get back to that notion of trying to defend who we are and what we stand for, but also being afraid of it. I think the legislature, they answer to their constituents. The chairman of the Republican Party has to be partisan and answer to Republicans. And so oftentimes that may cause some discomfort between the legislature and the chairman. But for example, the gun vote. That should have been an opportunity for us to raise money and to be in the forefront, but because it made some legislators uncomfortable, we really didn't take much of a stand as a party. and that had to do with party leadership. That's going to happen. There's always going to be moments where the party chairman doesn't necessarily have to agree with some of what legislators do, and the party chairman can't just snap to it and do whatever they want as well. But there can always be communication and understanding. For example, if there was a vote that the legislators had to take that was in disagreement with, say, some values of the Republican Party, the answer is simple. They have a constituency to answer to. And I think that as long as there is open lines of communication and it's not a hostile situation, because ultimately we have to raise money. And you raise money with issues like this. Whether it was, I know in New London, Snakegate, many of you might not be familiar, but a Democrat state rep said something very offensive to a young girl. That was a prime opportunity to raise money. Our legislative leaders were uncomfortable in doing that. That is where I might be a little different, where I think the state party should stand on its own 2 feet and be its own organization with coordination, not control. So, thank you.
I'll probably have a couple opportunities to talk about the relationship of the legislature to the state party, since it seems to be the thing that most interests people about my candidacy. But let me say something about the notion of who a legislator answers to and what the legislature's like. I've been thinking recently. I spoke to the college students over at Wesleyan last night, as a matter of fact, and I thought, these kids are watching too much TV. They got an idea of the way that things work behind closed doors that is much more Machiavellian than what the truth of the matter is. I don't see any, I feel like, I represent the interests of my constituents by promoting the values of the Republican Party. The only way that my hometown or the district I represent can thrive is if the state of Connecticut comes back. We can't make Southington prosperous in a state that's gone down the drain. And the only way the state of Connecticut comes back is if we restore the principles that made it a great state in the first place, of free enterprise and personal liberty and limited government that knows where to step away and keep its nose out of other people's business. I think the advantage of the possibility of serving in the legislature and being the chairman of the party is to have the chance to understand exactly what is going on in the legislature and to coordinate the legislative effort with the party effort, especially when it comes to campaigns again. We've got 2 caucuses that are very important in the recruitment of candidates, in the training of candidates and campaign managers, in support to candidates. They can't make it happen all by themselves, but it is an ideal, but I've worked very closely on the Senate side with the staffers that are responsible for that, closer than any other senator. And I can do the same on the House side. I think it's a good situation. That said, state party can't dictate to legislators what they do, and legislators can't dictate to the state party what they do. And my vote as a legislator is my own vote. It's not a reflection of the party, it's not what the party tells me to do, or my leadership tells me to do, or even what my constituents tell me what to do. It's what my principles tell me to do. So, thanks.
So Tom, this goes right back to your question, although it may not be readily apparent, and that is, we cannot have an adversarial relationship with the Republican leaders in the legislature. We can't. Why? Because if we're adversarial, it's going to be out in the public, and what do? We look like idiots. We look like a bunch of a political party that we can't agree amongst each other. That can't be the situation, and both of the candidates up here who spoke before me spoke to that issue. There has to be some coordination between the state party and our legislative leaders and open lines of communication. We have to be smart about it. I was a trial lawyer a long time ago as a prosecutor in New York City, and one of our first lessons, and then when I went out to teach it, was trials and exercise in persuasion. And what that means is that everything counts. Everything counts. Because when the jury walks in, they take note of everything. Whether your jacket's buttoned, whether it's not buttoned, whether you're sitting, you're standing, everything counts. And I think politics is, in many respects, the same way. Everybody's watching. All the voters in Connecticut, they're watching us. And if we want people to say, you know what, these guys are the responsible guys, they're the common sense party, they're smart about it. Well, then we can't be openly fighting with the legislators, or with Len Pisano and Themis Claris. We can't. They can't dictate to us. We can't dictate to them. So when it comes to issues like taking an issue, raising money on it, using an issue to attack Dan Malloy on, we should be smart about it. We should have a rapid response system. where they're giving us great issues from the legislature, we're taking that, creating message, and we're constantly saying things, doing things to support the Republican brand, and vice versa. And when we come to those moments where we disagree, just like in the primaries we're talking about, we have to figure a way, and I think it only comes with good leadership, to be able to talk to each other without killing each other and killing the brand of the Connecticut Republican Party. So, hope that answers the question.
Dan?
My question is, and it still bothers me today, is we had an excellent candidate for the 29th. And a lot of work went into electing him. And our enemy, and I give kudos to the enemy, the Democrats, they were allowed to go into Yukon or have gone into Yukon and get busloads of kids to go to the area towns in 29th and register. I'm a believer that most of these students, number one, they don't pay taxes, they're out of state, some are from third world countries and whatnot. I'm asking you guys, how do we beat that? What can be done? Does that make the difference between our candidate and you know, the normal populace out here?
Can I just add something to what he said? I'm the chairman of Mansfield. Not only did they do that, but your Secretary of State did it, along with the head of the Democrat Party at UConn recruited students. So it's a very strong response that they have, and they not only influence the 29th district, but they also influence referendums within the town of Mansfield. And if you ask me, college students, I was in the Navy, and if I had to vote, it was absentee. They can do the same thing. I think we ought to look at this, because this is happening in all the colleges in Connecticut. They're very predominantly, just get swept by the Democrats, big time. And we had them, so we have a special voting area just for students, you know. And it's pretty interesting to watch what happens. They don't even have to give, they just have to say they live at UConn. They don't even have to show a light bill. It's crazy, and they register the same day.
If it wasn't for that, we could sway the other way and then bring it to the.
That will keep the 29th district in real trouble.
It's one of the problems we have as a party is there's certain dead weight throughout the state that we have to carry. Concentrations of students are one of them. The big cities, obviously, another one. Just areas. It's like you feel like you start the game 14 points behind, and you've got to do everything right to catch up. A part of this problem is a matter of state law, and I mean that's just a situation of saying, do we allow students to register at the college or don't we? And if it's allowed, it's allowed. Another part of it is a matter of policing, and certainly that's the case in the cities. I think that all of us suspect shenanigans in Bridgeport and New Haven and maybe in some other places. There's been an effort, and there's a case where the party, I would agree with what JR was saying, the party needs to show some courage. There was an effort a couple of years ago to set up a voter integrity kind of a task force. And it ultimately was torpedoed more or less on the theory that we don't want to look like we're being, well, voter integrity, the integrity of the elections is maybe the most important thing that we do as a government, because if we can't count on the results of the elections, everything else becomes irrelevant. So that side of it, I think it would be important for us to pursue a kind of legal monitoring kind of effort that would guarantee that the elections were done by the book. You know, the third thing is, if we know that we're starting out 2 touchdowns down, it means that we got to have our game absolutely together. Part of it is to turn out whatever students we can find at UConn. I mean, in the same way that we say in Bridgeport, we've got to find the homeowners that'll vote Republican if we can get them out to the polls. We've got to cut down the margins in the places where we're getting spanked. So I would say that's 3 possible approaches: the legal one, the monitoring approach, and the approach of trying to maximize what strength you have in the areas where you're weakest.
So I'm going to spend the lion's share of my time first saying I agree with everything Joe said about monitoring and policing. But I think the last part of what you talked about is the first where I want to start, and that is reaching out and connecting with the millennials and college because, I mean, we don't have a strategy at State Central. And while I think we need to monitor, police, and force, I think we need to beat them at their own game. And it goes back to creating a party that they're gonna be attracted to. And I would especially focus on young females, because then all the data shows that we have a hardest time attracting young females to the party versus young males. And that's something that we have ceded the high ground of the Democratic Party, this war on women, that they have just pounded that drum, and we've had no strategy to counter it. And we've got to counter it in a couple of ways, but in addition to getting on having a strategy, executing that strategy, being on college campuses, being present, connecting with these students, we also have to do it with social media. And if you look at our website for the Connecticut Republican Party, it is, I mean, it's terrible. And he can talk all day about this, more than I can, but I got 2 in college and 2 more that are on the computer all the time. I've said before, I won't take a salary for this job, and the money that would go to the chairman, I put it back into the infrastructure of the party, like our technology platform. We have to speak to these kids, young adults, in the way that they're used to speaking. And it kills me to say this, but my own kids, sometimes the best way that I communicate with them is not with a phone or in person, but by text. But I stay in constant contact with them, and they communicate back. So I know my time is coming to an end, but I don't disagree with anything Joe said, but I think my emphasis would be different. I want to get on those campuses, and I want to reach these kids and get them in the Republican Party. And again, we need to stay on message and create a brand that they're going to be attracted to.
Completely agree with both Joe and John. My perspective is a little different, and I'll, Joe and I actually worked together with Ann and several of you on that John French campaign. And what you're not recognizing is the fact that John French came closer than anyone has in 50 years. And it wasn't a surprise in what UConn did. John lost by around 500 votes. No one's come within 2,000 votes in that district in forever, because we did start to do things differently. And that's the point that we have to remember. We can't constantly look at it and say, UConn beat us. Well, sure, but you have long-term infrastructure and analysis of data from other towns like John beat May in Killingly. Capitalize and build on finding people in the surrounding towns, as long as and also having a long-term strategy. Because the interesting thing about UConn is those students are only there for 4 years. You constantly have to keep working on finding those kids. Would it be easier to find a 40-year-old living in Mansfield that you can convince to vote Republican every time? Who's going to live there? So I think the approach has to be two-pronged. I think you have to look at it strategically, not just throw our hands up in the air and say, UConn, Eastern, start approaching it from finding like-minded people who are unaffiliated, who already live in town. So I think we have to be strategic when we think about it. I think we do have to reach out to millennials. I think we have to improve our branding in that regard. I think we do have to use Facebook and social media and be creative and clever in how we communicate. But at the end of the day, if John had picked up 25 more votes, well, probably more than that, but say 40 more votes per town, UConn's beat.
It's like 320.
Well, but I'm just saying is that's another approach to say it has to be two-pronged. You can't ignore the district, the district that consistently votes, chasing just the college campus kids. So you just have to be smart about it.
And can I make just one quick comment?
Sure.
It's not a question, just a comment. In the police and monitoring, there is available from the U.S. government information that can be used to police and monitor these voters. The registrar, and only the registrar, can request from the Postal Service all the change of addresses in their district. Now, you could say, well, a lot of people don't file a change of address. Well, the post office files what's called a move left no address. So you can challenge these phantom voters. And what's the state going to say? They use the same database. The welfare department uses the same database. So you can challenge these.
Okay. I think the next question starts with John.
Is this an and question?
Yeah.
they're variety from different people. I know you guys have spoken about some different things you do, but what is the very first thing that you see that you would be doing as chair? The very first thing?
Yeah, so, good question. Number one, I would, my first State Central Committee, I would ask the State Central members, number one, what committees do you think we need? Because it comes to organization, and State Central has to do more than meet once a month and have dinner and argue. These meetings, my board meetings, my staff meetings, my executive management meetings, I have an agenda, and we need to be productive. And when I said before, State Central needs to own this mission. It's not, State Central has to get to work. And it's a volunteer organization, you can't make people do things. But my first question would be, what committees do we need? One person can't do it all. Republican Party in Connecticut, it's not a big state. The Republican Party is a big organization. You gotta be able to manage this organization and move it in a positive direction. We have really no committees at State Central. I know there's a bylaws committee meeting right now, or elections committee. But we have to make this State Central Committee productive. The second thing, and that's the first thing, but the second thing is, we need to come together, and we probably need to go off-site, have an off-site meeting, and spend a lot of time in saying, what is our brand? What do we stand for? And come to some consensus on that. A mission statement. This is who the Connecticut Republican Party is. This is what we stand for. This is what we agree on. That creates accountability. And then the question is, after that, how are we going to put that message forward? And what's our strategic plan? And for that, you have to probably bring in a facilitator. So this is sort of turnaround strategy 101 that we employ in the business world, and not everything can translate over to the political world. But basic management, organizational skills, and strategic planning, I think it's sorely needed in this party, and I would start with that.
I would take a huge swing at Dan Malloy, but that's just me. For me, I think fundamentally we'd have to go in and analyze exactly where the party is from an infrastructure, and we know it's weak, but we just have to see how bad it is. Find out what they're doing well, find out what they're doing not well, and then quite frankly, I would start with town chairman and State Central members and asking them what they need. Because fundamentally the fastest way to build an organization is to let volunteers be heard. And so that would be the first fundamental thing that I would do is I would go to individual town chairmen, ask them where State Central's been deficient, and how we can assist moving forward. It's how you get buy-in in an organization. With buy-in comes donors, with buy-in comes excitement, and you can't do it without the people and the man on the street. So that's where I would start. I know a lot of you have dedicated your time, your lives away from your families, donations for campaigns, candidates, and for State Central. So understanding the value in that and showing that State Central is trying to listen to what you guys want and need, I think is a great start, and where I would start to reopen those lines of communication to make the grassroots organizers and volunteers proud again. So that would be my number one focus.
I agree with everyone's number one focus, right? But that's more than one number one focus. The problem is, there's a lot of things you feel like you wanted to do right away. And I think John's conversation about the meeting, I guess you'd say there's going to be a first State Central meeting with a new chairman. And that would be a critical moment. And I think that my approach would not be dissimilar on that score. So I'll leave that one aside as one kind of first, and talk about another one, which is I think the first thing I might put myself to doing is to finding the best possible staff that I could for the State Central Committee. I think that you need to have a real search for an executive director, first of all, because that's going to be a critical function no matter who is the chairman. And I would look for talent from out of state as well as in state. We've had an unfortunate situation, I think, in some ways in the Connecticut Republican Party. Just like all the other talent that is leaving our state, the young people that leave our state because they don't see opportunities. Some of the most talented political operatives we have are people that are working elsewhere now. I try to, some of them I wouldn't mind inviting to see if they were interested in coming back home. There's people who've been successful in states, John mentioned, Wisconsin is a model for a lot of people that I'd be curious to see who was available there. And the last thing I'd say about this is I would try to do that process in conjunction with the State Central Committee. I mean, again, there's certain decisions that have to be made by a single decision maker in the end. But that doesn't mean that the process of reaching that decision can't be a collegial one. And I think that I'd invite in a group of people, say, let's have a search committee to go through the resumes, to look through them, to come up with, to have multiple eyes look and decide who needs to have an interview, and to be president of the interview, and to have people to bounce off reactions about who we've seen and what we think they have to offer. But I would be very focused on hiring the very best talent that I could get. I think you could live with a small staff if you had a very, very good staff.
Audience, question, Dan? I think we're starting with Jar. Jar's turn first. Okay, Dan, and then I'll do you, okay?
We've talked earlier and often about the RTCs and empowering the RTCs, getting the RTCs built and such. We've talked about education, the data. These are all things that have come up, and of course, going out and asking the RTCs, the chairs, what they could do. From your experiences, what is one thing you see you could have State Central do that would most help to energize and empower the RTCs in their communities?
I think I have fun with this. I know when working with John French's campaign, how many people came to that gas tax thing? And it was fun, right? I mean, it's working with town committees to come up with clever and fun ideas to espouse our values, find some information about the voting base, and be proud of what we're doing. Not every town is going to be the same. There might be a local issue that we can help come up with a creative idea on empowering or recruiting. I mean, I actually had a conversation with, who did I speak with? Because they wanted looking to recruit members, and I suggested having a charity event, right? Go clean up a local park and invite the community to come, and then it's an opportunity for people to show up and meet you on a one-on-one basis that isn't a political, Democrat versus Republican situation, and then they can start to get familiar with who you are and what you guys stand for, and they're more likely to join the ranks. So it's having just open lines of communication and feeling as though that town chairman, town committee members, and State Central members are being heard by that office, because I know right now there's a lot of State Central members that are even frustrated with communication. And then continuing the dialogue to feel assisted. You can't win without the people in this room. You can't win without their help. You can't win without monetary support. And so the more that you focus on building those relationships, the better off we are going to be as a party. And that's how I see us getting to the point of having a majority back in this state and winning elections. It's through the people in this room. And inspiring.
It's a good question. What can you do for the town committees? There's a way in which one wants to say we should ask what the town committees can do for State Central, because I think by and large the town committees are in better shape. That the strength of the party right now is more at the local level, and the state level is weak. However, I think the best thing that you could do for the town committees was laid out for us by Jerry in the beginning of the program. It is funny, because it's something that I've thought about over the years. I was a town chairman myself, and that notion of cross-fertilization between town committees, which I tried to do at the time, it was many years ago, with the towns that just happened to be local to me, is very important. And I think that what Jerry touched on is the key to it, which is to have a situation of mentorship in which people don't feel like they're being put down. And what I liked the best about what he said was, we'll get them together, then I'm not sure what's going to happen. Because I think anybody who thinks that they can plot a political operation out too many moves ahead is kidding themselves. You can't force it to happen. But you can create the circumstances that allow good things to happen. And then one town committee says to the other, gee, over here we're doing this, we have good luck with a chicken barbecue, we did a potluck supper, we did whatever, do you guys do an ad book? And that kind of conversation can take place. Corollary to that is the fact that, again, you guys have the advantage of Grassroots East. There isn't anything like Grassroots East in the other 4 congressional districts. I mean, a couple of them have the vestiges of a congressional district organization, and a couple of them have nothing. I think one of the most important things that we could do from the top, from the party, is to make sure that we have 5 functioning congressional organizations, so that you can get people in a room together, so that you can have an event like that Grassroots East Dinner, which was one of the most encouraging things that I've seen as a Republican. To be in a room so big, I couldn't even find the people I was looking for, because they were off in the distance someplace. So, and that's a notion of what I would do, as well as showing up at the town committees, just to know that we care about them.
So, I'm sorry I didn't go second for this one, because Joe stole my answer, but he nailed it right on the head. There's nothing more important, and I get told Derek's in the back room, and he's gonna say, don't always focus on business principles when you're talking about, but this is important, because this is about organizational structure and management. And there's nothing more important than sharing knowledge, nothing. If you read many Jack Welch books, it's all about sharing knowledge and the improvements that you can make in an organization by taking someone on this side of the organization who's doing something well and facilitating communication with that person, someone else in a similar position within the organization who's not doing so well. And that only comes from the top, facilitating that communication and getting people to share knowledge, and that's the way they improve what they're doing. And so, when the RTC, what was, I'm sorry, your first name?
Dan.
Dan, I think the most underutilized assets we have in this state, and I just had a conversation with someone else today about this, are RTCs and RTC chairmen, in that there are so many folks at the local level who I think have great ideas, great strategies, great organizations, and they're not being utilized, and they don't have an open invite up to State Central. They're not getting an invite saying, let's have lunch today. What are you doing that's working? Not coming out to the district, coming to a meeting, or just coming and having a cup of coffee and saying, you've been incredibly successful here in this town. What are you doing? Would you be willing to come with me to the next State Central meeting? Or go over to another town that is right next door that's not doing so well? Or come downstate, go across the state. That's what I think you need to do. And it comes to, and Joe, you hit it right on the head, it comes to sharing knowledge. And that's not gonna happen just overnight. It's not gonna happen by hoping it happens. That's gotta be facilitated by, I think, the leadership.
Okay, next question. How do we fight unions and the big dem money? And this goes to Joe?
Say it again, Julianne.
I distracted him.
What was the question?
How do we fight unions and big Democrat money?
Well, we fight unions, Democrats, the whole thing. It's about how do we win. It's not to say, we can't control what the other side does. We don't necessarily respond particularly to the union money or to the big Democratic money or the whatever. We gotta build an organization that wins on our own terms, no matter what they do. One thing we've got is, they've got sources of funding that they have cultivated, that they know how to get the money out of. It's not that, in that sense, I wouldn't necessarily call it an unfair advantage. It's an advantage they have developed for themselves over the years. We have to do the same thing, and we have to raise money by giving people confidence that we can win, and a reason to support us as a party. To say these guys can do it, and if they do it, they will take the state in a different direction. I think those two things, which would energize people generally, would go a long ways towards countering whatever it is that the Democrats throw at us. And as much as aware as we are of our weaknesses, we've got to remember what their weaknesses are too, which is the average person in this state. Let's say the average working middle-class person, the people that are like the bunch of us in this room, and is a wide swath from maybe from folks in the east end of Waterbury to the folks in Greenwich. But the people that are working are sick of what's going on, and they know the state's going down the drain. That's a tremendous, that's people that are waiting to come to our side. And I feel like the results of the last election, of the last two elections, were a case where it was obvious that there was a desire to vote Republican if our candidates could make the contact with the people that they needed to make. If they could make a connection and they could come out with a clear message. The trumpet has to sound clearly, or the troops aren't going to respond. So, a good strong party, a good strong message is what will counter whatever the Democrats can throw at us.
This is an awesome question, and I do think you need to be a little bit more strategic, because I think the private sector unions are some of the lowest hanging fruit in the state that we can go after. Ronald Reagan won the Teamsters when he ran. There is absolute facts on our side that we can go after the private sector unions in this state and win. Let me tell you something. I serve on a board, Connecticut Innovations, and who serves on the board with me? John Olson, the head of the Teamsters in Connecticut, right? By the way, very bright guy. I know for a fact that the private sector rank and file feel like Dan Malloy has done nothing for their cause, zero. If you're not part of the public sector unions, like at UConn, or working for the state somewhere else, they feel that Dan Malloy has done nothing for them. Yet, what kind of strategic plan have we had to go after that low-hanging fruit? I think they are, along with women, I think they are two of the most viable constituencies that we should be going after. And I think the way we do it, going back to what Joe said and what I said before, when we talk about the brand, I think we have to put something out there that's going to appeal to them, just like Reagan did. And I'll finish with this. For Ted Cruz, I'm not a Ted Cruz guy, right? But I think he's very, very bright. I like listening to him talk. But the point is, for a conservative like Ted Cruz, on the day that he announced his presidency, to stand up there and say, this party needs to get back to the days of Reagan, where we gave those Reagan Democrats, or blue-collar workers, a reason to vote for us, because they had more hope and trust and faith in us that we're going to better their position in this world than the Democratic Party. We need to get back to that and stop killing each other and hurting the brand over those things that we don't agree on. And so I think you're not going to stop from raising money from these folks, but I do think we beat them at the ballot box and we get them to vote for us rather than for the Democrats.
I think two main points about unions. One is, I think there's a big distinction between membership and leadership. I think we have to get better at communicating with the membership about where we stand, how voting for Republicans would better their lives. I think all of us are in agreement there. And organizationally, you can't beat a system and a machine like the Democrats have if we aren't as organized and trained and dedicated. One of the hardest things about winning elections as Republicans is that we don't have a built-in system of people who are reliant on Republicans being elected. That's why they're so dedicated. And in order to kind of crack that code, we have to further understand their mentality, being able to communicate to them, but we have to be just as dedicated and inspired. And the stakes have to be just as high for us. And I know it's hard to do because you're volunteering your time. But if we have an efficient system where we're identifying voters, we're communicating to voters on issues that they care about, and I know when we did the gas tax petitions up here in the 29th, gas tax, Common Core, all of those petitions, and you use that information and data to capitalize at the ballot box, you will be victorious. It's going to be a 5, 10, 15-year program. It's the same with an urban strategy. It's going to take dedication and years, but it will be worth it in the long run. Organization, communications is the key to winning over that constituency. So.
Mike, I know I promised you the next one.
One of my concerns is the current dysfunction of the state central office and its various subcommittees. First of all, we have the Young Republicans, one guy. We have, who happens to be also our attorney, he gets a vote on state central. We have college Republicans. Again, where'd this guy come from? And I see no organization here except affronted heads for, special interests. I have people in my town that have tried to go to the Young Republicans, which is supposed to be anyone under 40, and they can never find where there's a meeting. It's, these are privately held things. Also, one of my concerns, especially in the state Senate races, in order to get the 300 people, is something from state central to go to national and come back with high school Republicans, because these kids can give $5 or $10 and help us get to those 300 people, especially in the seats that we don't control. And I'd like to know what you would be doing for that, number one. And the second part, going off of what Joe Barkley came about, exactly with positions that are gonna be open, we at State Central are just set at a meeting, and all of a sudden, this person's been nominated for, or this person is now the executive director, this person's a political director. I wanna know what you're gonna do to openly recruit, have I think a screening committee where, I don't know who you pick, but 3 people go through and say, here's the 3 candidates, Mr. Chairman, you know, you're the final vote, but this is just like when you have a judge. They go out, they come out with a list of candidates, and then the person in charge makes the decision. So those are some of my concerns, because I see total ineptness now. Thank you.
And so, Mike, your questions are, raises a great point. You know, as you'll hear us talk, Joe will run circles around me when it comes to issues going on at the Capitol. He'll run circles around me about tactical issues at the local campaign level. This is about organizational instruction. When you asked before, what's the first thing you would do? It's about creating an organization and managing the organization. So when I said before, who's responsible? What's the strategy for communicating with the young Republicans, growing the young Republicans? We don't have one, right? And so when I said before, the first thing I do is we need to set some structure in place, right? And it's a service organization, so you need people to raise their hands and volunteer. But the first conversation I would have is, what should the structure of this party be? What are the committees we need? Well, one of the committees we need is on talent recruitment and development. One of the committees we're going to need is outreach to millennials. One of the committees we're going to need is, J.R. talks about the ground game campaigning. So one person is not, it's not a scalable model to just elect the right person. One person is going to do it all. You need that committee, that State Central Committee, to become productive. There's lots of talent in that room. There's lots of talent outside of that room that they're not on State Central, but they want to be involved. But someone, and ostensibly the leader of the party, has to say, okay, let's have a conversation. Here's the structure we're going to have for this party. Here's how we all agree it's going to be most effective. Now, who wants to be on the outreach committee to the young Republicans? Who's going to be on the outreach and the candidate development committee? Who's going to be on the strategic? And once we get buy-in and we get people to say, okay, and now it's up to the leader to say, let's agree on what your roles, responsibilities are, and what our expectations are going to be of this committee. And that's how you make people accountable. Because even though they're volunteers, if you made it very clear what this committee is going to do, and the people volunteer to say, I want to be on the committee and I think I can be effective. When they come back and they're not being effective, that's when you can make them accountable.
Well, fortunately for me, I do have some institutional knowledge on what the party rules are, having worked there so long. Fundamentally, I understand what you're saying. The young Republicans get to vote. For those that don't know, in true non-leadership fashion, we did what the Democrats did, right? We empowered the college Republicans and the young Republicans to get a vote when it comes to choosing officers. Now, the way the party rules work is you guys can change that rule anytime you want. In fact, with 2/3 vote, you could take that away. But again, that's a decision the committee should make, not the chairman.
No, the problem is that they don't have any meetings, and people from my town have called up and asked for.
Well, the young Republicans.
And the young Republican, and it turns out that the council for the State Central gets his own vote. That's wrong, as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, that is that.
Show. His answer was, I'm the only one to pay dues, therefore I get to vote on State Central. Because he was confronted on that.
That is certainly something that I think that you guys should address and discuss at the next meeting. Yeah.
But the whole point of it is that the chairman didn't seem to really care about it. I'm just asking what you're going to do about it. I don't care what's been in the past. I want to know what you guys are going to do.
I probably wouldn't hire someone who had it doesn't look good for someone to hire someone that has a vote that is from an outside group. But in terms of, I think the attempt to court young Republicans and college Republicans was in the proper vein, just executed poorly. And that's kind of what the engagement was attempted to do, to show that we're trying to reach out to a younger audience. But in terms of organizationally and how State Central...
Well, this is what I'm talking about. What John said is that you want to reach out... I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're talking about...
Taking my time here.
The problem is that we have this... It's just like the laws that are on the books and nobody wants to enforce it. We have the young Republicans. We have a function to go out and get the millennials. Yet the chairman has not done anything in the past 4 years about it. What are you guys going to do about it? That's what I want.
Well, certainly, if the committee has an appetite to discuss this and vote to remove those people from having votes...
I don't have a problem if they have a vote. I want to know why there's an organization that doesn't...
That's not, but that organization isn't under our purview. That's the problem. So the college Republicans operate separately and so do the young Republicans. So I think fundamentally it becomes a problem because they're separate entities. But organizationally, I've been there when you've had all these committees and all of these members sign up. I think fundamentally, though, is you have to know what we've done in the past and what worked and what hasn't worked. And where my experience is 7 years of organizing those very committees of candidate recruitment, fundraising, everything that I did when I was at the state party, we have to assess how we do that this time. We can't do it in the same vein that we did it before. Because it didn't work. So that's just where a little bit where I have that kind of added advantage of the institutional knowledge. But in terms of those organizations, you guys are going to have to discuss that as a committee and figure out what you want to do. So,
Just to be fair to JR, what worked? And if it's okay, because it was
Well-
a little bit, why don't you talk about what worked? I think it's something fair.
well, I think the biggest part is that it hasn't. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you have a lack of truly understanding of what the roles and responsibilities of state central members are. When you're a new state central member, there's no guide, there's no book to tell you what you're supposed to do. There's no understanding. And I think that fundamentally, we as an organization has to address that. Now, I know for many years that state central members have argued what their responsibilities are. There's those that don't want to do much, like the title. And then there's those that want to work really hard, so no one wants to agree on a standard. And I think that time has to end. I think that the State Central Committee has to come together, organize what their roles, responsibilities should be as members, and then go from there. And I know it's tough because it's a volunteer organization, but fundamentally, anytime that you've had these discussions, and I've been in rooms where they've screamed at each other about some don't want any accountability. And it's difficult because they're not elected by the chairman or other state central members, they're elected by their local town. So you have to understand that process and understand how that operates in order to motivate